Being a Jane Austen nerd says this about me. I love books and history. If this sounds anything like you, stick around for a mini vlog of Bath, its bookshops, and a book haul. My love of Jane Austen meant that I was desperate to visit Bath, a Somerset town that Jane spent some of her life and about which she penned 2 novels, Northanger Abbey and Persuasion. I kind of knew what to expect of the Georgian spa town as I, like most people, have watched Bridgerton. I particularly love the bright, coastal feeling to the town, and I think coastal comes to mind mainly because of all of the seagulls that are circling, which made a pleasant change from city pigeons. There are plenty of green spaces, and the sense of history is palpable from its Roman origins to the Regency literary legacy. Persephone Books, an independent press and bookshop renowned for printing forgotten women's writings of the 19th and 20th centuries. The beautiful space is my idea of heaven. There are huge windows to let in the sun and illuminate the meticulously artistic arrangement of fabrics, freshly cut flowers, and of course, books. The covers come in 2 styles, a simplistic dove gray with cream label, and their bookshop-friendly editions with artwork. The simplistic covers allow readers to focus on the storytelling instead of judging a book by its cover. The few covers with artwork are their best sellers, great for newcomers to Persephone. There's an atmosphere that I can only describe as a celebration of domesticity. The way domesticity interacts with these authors' art and politics encapsulates the press's commitment to excellence and a spectrum of femininity at every juncture. Topping & Company, a familiar favorite. I visited their Edinburgh branch in the previous video, which I'll link in the description, and was blown away. This time, I need to expect an oasis for book lovers. Housed in a historical building of bursting bookshelves, antique ladders, and cozy corners to further explore your haul, the Bath branch did not disappoint. The building reflects the Palladian style of architecture that is synonymous with Georgian England, and by extension, Bath. Having accumulated an armload of books, I headed to a cozy corner equipped with a pot of tea to dig through the pile. The third visit of Mr. B's Emporium was as quirky as the word Emporium implies. I'm obsessed with the bathtub turn book display unit on the first floor of the shop. Another unique feature with the Bookish Emporium was the wide collection of fancy, cloth-bound editions of Terry Pratchett's Discworld series. I have not yet read any Terry Pratchett, but these beautiful editions gave me even more incentive to start. Much like Toppings, Mr. B's invites you to find a cozy spot and flip through your stack. I especially love this graphic novel that served as a history of wine. I can't speak highly enough about my experience with the staff. When I asked for a book recommendations that were character-driven and cozy, the member staff immediately knew which books to pick. They were obscure, they were ones that I maybe necessarily hadn't heard of before, which is exactly what I'm looking for in a bookshop. A while ago, I went on a trip to Bath. This place is just a book lover's paradise. It's not only is it beautiful, not only does it have a lot of history and literary history, but the bookshops there are just stunning. There's a quote from Oscar Wilde that's something along the lines of, "It's not the priest that grants absolution, it's the act of admitting it aloud." But that's basically how I feel about the fact that I realize that I've bought a ridiculous amount of books, and you can't criticize me for that because I've admitted it's a ridiculous amount of books. So on we go. Very iconic of Persephone, it's the dove gray cover. They take fabrics from the period of which this is published, and they use that as their end paper design. So their publications are all so intentional. The quality of these, and one more exciting thing about the publication of the books, they're amazingly floppy, and this is done on purpose because it's a specific kind of book binding that they do, and it basically allows the book to splay open without damaging the spine so that you are able to read this, for example, if you have children that you're looking after or you're cooking, and it's very much going back to that idea again of women have been and continue to be expected to perform a lot of the domestic labor, so they want to be able to provide accessible ways of reading these stories. It's so intentional, it's so beautiful. First one of which being The Making of a Marchioness by Frances Hodgson Burnett. She is well known for her writing of The Little Princess and The Secret Garden, and those are both kind of children's fiction books, but this is an adult fiction title. One of the quotes that Margarita Lasky says about this book is, "This is the best novel Mrs. Hodgson Burnett wrote, and good at the level she intended, that of the fairy story diluted with unromantic realism, but you could never have supposed its realism to be as harsh as we now perceive it to be." I don't know too much about this book, and I don't want to ruin too much of it about myself, but I believe it's basically about a woman who marries and she becomes a marchioness and she's learned the ropes of that. The second one I got is Miss Pettigrew Lives for a Day by Winifred Watson, and this is one of their best known titles. It was adapted a few years ago into a movie with Amy Adams, and it's a Cinderella story of a nanny or a governess, and her agency mistakenly sends her to this one house, and the woman there is basically dresses her up, and it's that like a movie montage of a glow up, and fun ensues. The next one being Miss Buncle's Books by D.E. Stevenson, and it's basically about this woman who's considered a spinster in her small town, and so to make money she's decided to write a book, but not just any book, a book that is written and taken a lot of inspiration, perhaps wholesale, from her village and her neighbors. She gets this book published, it goes the 1940s, 50s equivalent of viral. The people reading are like that scene from Euphoria.
Wait, is this play about us?
Like, is this book about us? So I'm very excited to read that one. It just seems like a hoot. It's got a little subplot of romance, and it's again, it's set in the countryside, and I do love an English countryside book, living in the English countryside myself, so I'm very excited about that one. And then the final classic that I got, which I have read, was They Were Sisters by Dorothy Whipple. This one, They Were Sisters, is basically about, again, these three sisters, and it kind of shows how the paths diverge depending on who they married. Someone married this really boring guy, the second sister married this really emotionally abusive man, and then the third sister married this man who is her equal and her partner and supports her. It's very much the focus on what love can do to a person, and your marriage partner is perhaps the most important decision as a woman, specifically in the time of like the 1930s, 1940s, the most important decision that you can make, because again, remember at this time women weren't allowed to have their own bank accounts, so they're very much tied up to their husband's discretion. Then kind of flows down into how that impacts the lives of your children, but it also ends on a very hopeful note of found family sort of situation, of extended family. Dorothy Whipple books always have like a kind of like bittersweet undertone to them, because on the surface of things they do seem really beautiful. Her writing style is so stunning. They combat very dark, difficult topics that are so important for women of the time, and I would say now even. So the next few books I have, these are the Dove Gray versions that have the beautiful inner pages. They also came with a free bookmark that matches those end pages, which is very exciting. First two books I'm going to talk about are ones that I have already read. High Wages by Dorothy Whipple. It's basically, again, a rags to riches story where it's this young woman and she is working in a dress shop and she becomes very passionate about it. She forges this really strong female friendship across class lines, and she eventually opens up her own shop. It's all about that experience. There is romance in it. Again, it has that undercurrent of bittersweet to it. It has like beautiful prose. She's just a master of bringing you in and really feeling comforted and safe in the environment while also tackling difficult themes, which I think is just a marvel, to be honest. I highly recommend this one. I gave it 5 stars. Not this is a reading review. The next book that I read, Reuben, Sachs by Amy Levy. This is published in the late 1800s, so that late Victorian period, which I think is very important to the tones. About this man named Reuben Sachs, and he is part of the middle upper class Jewish society in London, and it's all about the kind of inner workings of relationships and how people can be of different classes and live and be side by side, but deeper relationships are not acceptable. It also has themes of, again, marriage, making a prudent marriage, making a good choice, but also what is success. It does have a hopeful tone to it. In the preface by Julia Neuberger, she says this is a novel about women and Jewish women, about public life and Jewish public life, about families and Jewish families, about snobbishness and Jewish snobbishness. It was sold as kind of like the Jewish Jane Austen, and I agree to some parts. It's very much about society. It's very much making a caricature of certain people, your surroundings, who kind of like Miss Bennet types, kind of like the Sir Walter Elliot types. So yeah, it was good, but it was sad. The next book I picked up was Greenery by one of the few male authors, Dennis Mikhail, about this happily married couple in London, and it's the kind of honeymoon period, of the golden period of when they are engaged and then just getting married. And a lot of the Persephone titles talk about difficult marriages and conflict within marriage. However, this book does not do that. I was just looking for a very happy, optimistic read with this. The next one being a Flush Biography by Virginia Woolf. This sold me on 2 points. First of all, that Virginia Woolf wrote this. It's also kind of like a skinny book, but that wasn't the other selling point. The other selling point was she read a biography about this one author or artist, I forget who. And the woman had a dog named Flush. So this book is all about that dog. It's a biography about that little dog. And my favorite things are dogs and books. So a book about dogs, it doesn't get much better than that. Even though it is on the face of things a book about dogs, it's also billed as one that talks about loyalty, I believe, but also kind of following directions and how that intersects with feminism and how women are expected to do what they're told. Virginia Woolf, obviously a big feminist author of the 20th century. I've not actually read any of Virginia Woolf. I'm really planning to. I don't think this will be my first one because I don't know that it's necessarily a best big picture kind of view of what her work was, but I am very excited to get to this one. And then my final Persephone title that I got was another Frances Hodgson Burnett book called The Shuttle. If you like Downton Abbey, read this book. And I honestly don't know much more than that, and I kind of want to keep it that way. So it's basically about an American heiress that marries, which was very common in that period of time, early 1900s, late 1800s, of these old country estates were falling into ruin, so these aristocrats had titles but they didn't have money. So they married these wealthy, new money American heiresses, shipped them over, and they didn't always know what they were getting into. So I'm very excited for that, and this one's like a little bit of a chonky book, but it'll give me the opportunity to really get immersed in that world. I think it's gonna be a wonderful read. Those are all the books that I got at Persephone. I can't stop thinking about this bookshop. I just love it so much. Simply because I've spent so much time just gushing about Persephone books, and rightly so. But we're gonna move on and kind of more rapid fire. I then went to Mr. B's Emporium, and I went twice. The first time I just found A View of the Harbour by Elizabeth Taylor. Not movie star Elizabeth Taylor, but author Elizabeth Taylor. I really wanted to read one of her books, and this is one that kept coming up. She's an important British author with great subtlety, great compassion, great depth. I love kind of a quieter novel that is very reflective of characters and the kind of internal dialogue that you see of women and the domestic life, and just yeah, those quieter but very deep stories. So View of the Harbour, it's in a faded coastal village of Newby. Everyone looks out for and on each other, which is just so true of small villages. Everyone knows everyone's business. It sounds like it does have quite a bit of plot, but it's mostly focused on human relationship. And then this next book I have heard of, but when I asked one of the employees, I was like, hey, I explained exactly what I just explained to you about what I love in a novel: quiet, slow pace, and my favorites are like Pride and Prejudice, The Currency Literary, and Potato Peel Pie Society, and A Gentleman in Moscow. So that was kind of what I suggested, and so he was like, I know exactly what you need to read. You need to read Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan. Again, it's a small book, but it really packs a punch. Set during the winter, and I do like to read quite seasonally, so I might hold this off for later, but I don't know, it's just kind of, I'm such a mood reader. If I pick it up and it appeals, then I'm definitely gonna jump right into it. A coal and timber merchant goes around to different houses making deliveries, and so he encounters the complicit silences of a small community controlled by the church. People say things like, it goes straight to the heart, it's a gift of a book, it's a, like, again, it's a quiet read, so that kind of sold me. And then my final bookshop topping and company are coming to a close. I think I'm gonna group these by Jane Austen versus not Jane Austen. My first book I picked up was, I've read this book before, Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen. However, I'm trying to collect slowly all of the Jane Austen Penguin cloth-bound books. I'm excited about that. I'm excited to reread it. I'm especially excited to read it because I've finished reading Lucy Worsley, Jane Austen at Home. It just gives you a lot of insight into her writing process, how she felt about Bath, how she felt about books of the time. It's very much satirical of the kind of gothic shock horror books that were really popular when this was first being written, so the late 1700s. It's interesting to see how her first book that was later published posthumously and her final book, again published posthumously, of Persuasion, they're both set in Bath, but they have very different tone, they have very different main characters. Catherine Morland is very young, very silly, whereas Anne Elliot is one of her older heroines, 27, a spinster. She's very quiet, but she's also she knows her mind, she's very sensible. In a lot of ways people kind of feel like she's similar to Jane Austen. The next book I picked up was Black Penguin Classics that are so small and just fit in your back pocket. The Beautiful Cassandra by Jane Austen, and this is a collection of her mini stories and works that she penned when she was quite young. I think it will definitely be interesting because it's not that mature style that she really honed later in life, but again, nonetheless, more Jane Austen. Of the final of the Jane Austen book haul was Jane Austen at Home, as I said, a biography by Lucy Worsley. I adore this book, and I know I'm going to read it and reread it years and years from now. Lucy Worsley is a very well-known historian, at least in the UK, for good reason. She very much forms a narrative while also giving you the information. I think it helps that I'm just a little bit obsessed with Jane Austen. You learned a lot about who Jane Austen was and how she never got married, and although her books are really centered around romance and marriage, perhaps they were less about that and it was more of like a means to an end. She had so many opportunities to get married and have that permanent home and that permanent kind of family, but she specifically chose not to. I think she did really like her life. She was always surrounded by her family. She was like that surrogate mother to a lot of her nieces. Her most important relationship in her life with her sister Cassandra remained intact from birth to death. It's just such an interesting read, and I think that I will pick up new things when I'm rereading some of her books that I've already read or reading. I've not read Mansfield Park before. I have another Penguin classic, Oscar Wilde's Only Dull People Are Brilliant at Breakfast. It was sold to me as, if Oscar Wilde had a Twitter, this is what the Twitter would look like, and I was like, okay, bye, I have to have this. And it's actually, he's so funny. He's very dry and witty, but it gives you a little bit of insight into underneath the sheen of that kind of like flippant, dry wit. There is a lot of pain and frequently inflicted by society. I've actually not read any Oscar Wilde either. This was such a wonderful introduction to him. Stella Gibbons' Cold Comfort Farm. It's basically about this wealthy woman who, her parents leave her an orphan, and she discovers she's not as wealthy as she once thought she was, and so she's forced to go and live on a farm in the countryside with her aunt and uncle. And it's supposed to be really funny, very satirical. It was written in 1932, so I believe it'll have that very similar tone to a lot of the Persephone books of that like early 1900s female domestic, but also challenging these societally forced upon roles. Finally, A Study of Bells by Elizabeth Goudge. I've never read any of Elizabeth Goudge, but again, it's in that same vein of early 1900s female authors kind of questioning domesticity, settings frequently in the countryside, which I love, and it's basically centered around a man named Jocelyn Irvin who returns from the Boer War, and he rediscovers the enjoyment of life, and I love these life-affirming, happy books. I really love a book that's set in nature and kind of explores the idea of nature bringing back some vitality to us and bringing some color, like these beautiful tulips that I have. The only reason I picked up this book because book YouTuber who I just love, Miranda Mills, she says she loves Elizabeth Goudge, and I was like, well, if Miranda says that I should read that book, I should definitely read that book. And a lot of these books that I picked up, like a lot of Persephone's, those are ones that she suggested. Thank you so much for, if you've made it to this part of the video. I hope you enjoyed the books that I've hauled and like low-key reviewed. I had such a wonderful time in Bath. I highly recommend that if you haven't gone, that you go, or put it on your future bucket list of things to go do or see. It is just such a wonderful time. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in another video. Bye.